All right, hi everybody. Today we're going to talk about Objective 4.1. Objective 4.1 is about relations and the domain and range. So Unit 4 is all about functions. And the first lesson that we need to talk about when we talk about what a function is relations and also domain and range. So our objective is today we're going to express and interpret relations using different forms. We're going to be dealing with sets, mappings, and graphs. And then we're going to also talk about how do we identify the domain and range of a relation. Okay, so we're going to talk about domain and range a little bit today, but we're going to get more into domain and range in a couple lessons. So for now, we're just going to briefly touch upon it, and then we'll talk about it more as we move on. All right, so what is a relation? A relation is a way to express how one variable relates to another variable. Now, what does that mean? Well, when I say variable, I just mean one unknown. Okay, now what does that mean? Well, basically, we're just going to talk about the relationship between two things. How does one thing relate to another? Relations are made of inputs. Another word for inputs are called the domain. And they're also made of outputs, also called the range. So basically, each domain is going to be mapped to one element. Each element of the domain is going to be mapped to one element of the range. So one example of a relation is how are bicycles and tires related. Now, what the heck do I mean by that? Well, when we have 0 bicycles, if I have X be my bikes, I'm going to have 0 tires. Okay, one way I can represent that is by saying 0, 0. If X is my domain, and my domain represents the number of bicycles that I have, right, then that's going to be mapped to a range of 0. I'm going to have 0 tires. So 0 is going to be mapped to 0. Another way I can represent that is by that, an arrow. So I map 0 to 0, not a mapping. Okay, I can also say if I have one bike, I'm going to have 2 tires. If I want to map that, I'm going to say, okay, 1 is going to be mapped to 2. Okay, if I have 2 bikes, I'm going to have 4 tires. 2 is going to be mapped to 4. If I have 3 bikes, I'm going to have 6 tires. 3 is going to be mapped to 6. And if I have 4 bikes, I'm going to have 8 tires. 4 is going to be mapped to 8. So if I want to represent them using ordered pairs, this is what an ordered pair is. Just 2 things that are separated by a comma, and they are in parentheses. When I say things, I should have said numbers, right? X comma Y. And then if I want to represent a mapping, my domain is always going to go on the left, or my X is always going to go on the left, and my range is always going to go on the right. Okay, and I just map. Okay, 0 goes to 0, 1 goes to 2, 2 goes to 4, 3 goes to 6, 4 goes to 8. Okay, now, if I wanted to represent this on a graph, when I'm graphing points, remember that my horizontal axis is my x-axis, right? Whoops, sorry. My horizontal axis is my x-axis, and my vertical axis is my y-axis. So if I'm graphing, I'm going to say, okay, I want to graph 0, 0. That's going to go right here. 1, 2 is going to go right here. 2, 4 is going to go right here. 3, 6 is going to go here. And 4, 8 is actually going to be kind of off the graph, but that's okay. It's going to go up here. Okay? So we can represent relations either as a set of ordered pairs, as a mapping, or as a graph. Now, if I asked you to list the elements of the domain, what we would do is we would do these squiggly brackets, and we would just simply list all the x values. So we would do 0, comma 1, comma 2, comma 3, comma 4, and this is my domain. My range is simply just list all the y values, 0, comma 2, comma 4, comma 6, comma 8. Okay, so domain is just a list of all the x values. Range is a list of all the y values. Okay? Alright. So let's take a look at 3 examples here. Express each of these relations in the other 2 ways. So the first one, they give us a mapping, and we need to represent that as a set of ordered pairs. Alright? So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to figure out what number in my input is mapped to which number from my output. So here I have 0 goes to 2. So my first ordered pair is going to be 0, comma 2. Okay? My next one, 2 is going to be mapped to 4. So it's going to be 2, comma 4. My next one's going to be 5 maps to 7. So it's going to be 5, comma 7. And then my next one is 8 goes to 2. So 8, comma 2. Whoops, sorry. Okay, remember you got to put them in parentheses. If you don't put them in parentheses, that doesn't mean anything. Okay? Now if I asked you to list the elements of the domain and the range, we would do the same thing we did above. Our domain would just be simply listing all the x values. 0, comma 2, comma 5, comma 8. Our range, we're simply going to list the y values. So, our range, like I said, we're simply going to list the y values. So our range is going to be 2, 4, and 7. Okay? One thing I want to point out, please don't write 2 twice. Only write it 1 time. Make sure you put it in that squiggly bracket. Okay? Now to represent them graphically, alright, we're just simply going to plot the points. So 0, comma 2 is right here. 2, comma 4 goes right here. 5, comma 7 goes right here. And 8, comma 2 goes right here. Okay, we remember when we're graphing, we always go x, comma y. We find the x value on the x-axis, then we find the y value on the y-axis, and then where they intercept, that's where we plot our points. So nothing new there. Okay, all right, number 2. Now we need to go from ordered pairs to a mapping to a graph. So the first one we have is 0 goes to 6. So what I'm going to do is well, actually, first, before I do that, I need to find my domain and my range to make our lives a little easier. So our domain, I'm just going to simply list the x values. Okay, 0. Then I have 3. Then I have 4. Then I have 5, then I have 8. Now you don't have to list them in order from least to greatest, but it probably will make your life a little easier because when you're mapping them, you can just simply list them, right? 0, 3, 4, 5, and 8. Those are all my x values. Those are all my inputs. Okay, my range. We're simply going to list the y values. So if I'm going in order, I have 0, then I have 1, then I have 2, then I have 6, then I have 8. Okay, remember to put those squiggly brackets. Now, I'm going to list those on my range little circle here. 0, 1, 2, 6, and 8. Okay, now when I'm mapping these, I'm going to say, okay, 0 is going to be mapped to 6. Boom, put an arrow. 4 is going to be mapped to 1. Boom, put an arrow. 8's going to be mapped to 0, arrow. 3 to 8, arrow. 0 to 2. 0, I already have a 0, that's okay. I'm going to put another arrow from 0 to 2. 5 to 1, go from 5 over to 1. And it looks a little messy, but that's okay. If we follow the arrows all the way, we can see that each of them are mapped from to the same numbers, okay? So now when I graph these, 0, 6 is going to be up here. 4, 1 is going to be here. 8, 0 is going to be here. Let me fix 4, 1. It's a little messy. 3, 8. 0, 2. And 5, 1 is going to go right there. So we just got to plot the points. Okay, now the next one, we're given a graph. And now we need to put the ordered pairs and the mapping. Okay, so let's simply just find the coordinates of these points. So this one right here, this is going to be -3, 1. So our first coordinate pair is going to be -3, 1. Okay, our next one right here is going to be -2, -2. Make sure you put them in parentheses. Then we have 1, 1. Then we have 1, -3. Then we have 3, -2. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're just going to simply list our x values, list our y values in our domain and range. So our domain is going to be -3, -2, 1, and 3. Simply just list all of our x values. Our range, we're simply going to list the y values. So I have -3, -2, and 1. And that's it. Okay? So our domain, we're going to list all my x values. -3, -2, 1, 3. Range, going to list my y values. -3, -2, 1. And now I'm going to draw my mapping. Okay, -3 is mapped to 1, and these are coming from right here. -3 is mapped to 1, -2 is mapped to -2, 1 is mapped to 1, 1's also mapped to -3, so I'm going to put another arrow from 1, and then 3 is going to be to -2. Alright, so ladies and gentlemen, that's Objective 4.1. As always, if you need anything, please make sure you reach out if you have any questions. We're more than happy to help you, okay? Have a good day, and I'll see you soon.